And welcome to Haunted Hotels. My name is Sam Baltrusis, and I'm an author and journalist. Joining me is my good friend and possible distant cousin, Laura Brand. Welcome to the show, Laura.
Hey, how are you?
Hey, doing great. So when I said distant cousin, tell everybody how we met and sort of like our realization that we may actually be related.
So we actually met at a paranormal investigation at the Oliver House. And it was so funny because Sam was doing the seance and he goes, I'm a distant relative of Lizzie Borden and the Putnams. And I turned around and I just had my ancestry done. And I said, wait a minute, I'm in the same lineage of the Putnams and Lizzie Borden as well.
Yeah, and it was kind of like like friendship at first sight. We were investigating together at the Oliver House that night, and then we actually just did an investigation with Ryan Buell from Paranormal State this past weekend in Salem, and it was pretty cool because, first of all, we're connected to the Putnam family, who were the major accusers during the Salem witch trials, but also there was like a mock witch hunt at the old town hall.
What?
Yeah, and Laura, my cousin, actually accused me of being a witch.
I remember this part.
Yeah. So, to give you an idea, so we were staying at the same. There was a boutique hotel, and we'll talk a little bit about that hotel. But I had they're harmonizers, and they're like crystal harmonizers. They're super heavy, and I had them in my bag. And Laura's like, "Hey, can I take your bag?" And I handed her my bag, and it almost like literally like knocks her over. And so she accused me of stoning her to death. The witch trial.
Yep. Yeah, we had a ton of fun like reenacting the witch trials and like accusing each other of like how it was back in the 1600s. It was great.
So I want to point out, so the boutique hotel that we were staying at, so to give you an idea, so 20 innocent people were executed for witchcraft, and our cousin, Ann Putnam Jr., accused 61 people of witchcraft. So she was actually the ultimate bad girl or ultimate mean girl during the Salem witch trials. So the hotel that we were staying at, I actually worked at for a while, and we talk about the experience that kind of changed my life working the overnight shift. But I was working the overnight shift, and I saw like a black mass appear in the lobby, and then the black mass somehow like hit the down button on the elevator, and it went down to the basement. I followed it thinking it was a person, and then I basically hear like a moaning noise, and I go upstairs, and I have an encounter with a man wearing a hat. So it was like a black shadow wearing a hat. And Laura, I suspect it's actually one of our relatives that was trying to reach out to me.
Was it like one of those 1600s like tall hats?
Actually, yeah, so it was a 1600s tall hat. I kind of said it looked like a pilgrim. So it was actually reenacted on the TV show Paranormal Night Shift. And I give kind of like a detailed account. But yeah, the person did have a sort of a pilgrim-esque 1600s era hat.
Yeah.
Anything?
No, I was going to say I've seen a shadow figure with the pilgrim hat before, and I never connected it to being like an ancestor of ours.
Or it may be one of our stalkers. So Laura Brand happens to be a serial killer expert. And so Laura, first of all, like because we're related, and I've been a journalist for most of my life, and you're a serial killer expert. Do you find that genetically we're sort of predisposed to be hunters?
Yeah, I do. There's actually studies being done. There's a warrior gene. And you're more predisposition to hunt. And I truly think our lineage has this predisposition of this warrior gene. And, it's also a gene they found in a lot of psychopaths, a lot of serial killers, but, also a lot of, forensic psychologists, a lot of law enforcement too. And we had this conversation in Salem where it could really go either way, depending on childhood and, sociology and environment and everything. But yeah, I definitely think we have this gene.
And so there was a study that was done by one of our descendants, our relatives, who's also related to Lizzie Borden and the Putnams. And it turns out that he did a PET scan on his brain, and the PET scan actually was a serial killer style brain scan. And you and I were talking about this in Salem as well. Like, do you think, like, would you be nervous to get a PET scan on yourself? And I mean, I don't know how I would feel about getting a brain scan.
I would do it. I'm curious of what it reveals. Aren't you curious with our family what it could reveal?
I am super curious, and I think it actually, if I did get it, and say if I did have the gene, it would, or the scan, I think it would confirm what we suspect, which is that it was something different about our lineage, and to give everybody an idea, like how we're tied. So there was our connection is from a murder. It's actually a pretty famous murder that happened in New England in the 1600s. Thomas Cornell, who was accused of killing his mother, Rebecca Briggs Cornell, was actually accused by her ghost. So her ghost was brought into court to accuse him, and he ends up marrying my relative, who is Sarah Earl. That's how I'm connected to everybody, Sarah Earl, and she gets pregnant with a girl named Innocent Cornell Borden. And Innocent Cornell is the matriarch of the Borden family. So that connector connects us to not only the Putnam family, connects us to Lizzie Borden, our cousin, also connects us to Marilyn Monroe. We're connected to Eileen Wuornos. It's crazy, Laura, who we're connected to.
I know. It's a wild family tree. It's a wild family tree.
And how did you find out about your connection?
You know, it was what's so weird is it was right before I met you, right before the Oliver House. I just signed on with a forensic genealogy team. I'm actually working on getting my forensic genealogy certification, and I'd asked them to do the family tree of all the victims, Bittaker and Norris's victims, and they were going through doing theirs, and they said, why don't we do yours? And they did my entire tree because they wanted to see if I had any connection to the victims. And that's when they called me back and they were like, well, you're related to the Borden, very closely related to Lizzie. You could actually take your DNA and could be tested against hers, very close cousins. And you're also through the Putnam line with this one lineage. And then I go to the Oliver House and I find you. And when I heard you say that, I was like, whoa, because I had just found out about this lineage of mine.
Now, do you think it was kind of fated that you and I met?
Yeah, totally. I mean, you had just recently found out too, right?
I did too. Well, my mother is Southern. She's in Florida, and she was like, Sam, I think our family burned witches. And I'm like, Mom, they were hanged, not burned. And so that started the whole, her doing a lot of research on Ancestry.com. And I worked with her on it. And I'm so proud of my mother for putting all the work into finding out who are we, like where we came from. Right. She kind of withheld the Borden discovery. She knew it was going to affect me, and I'm kind of glad she did, because the Putnam ties was a lot for me to process, because I've been a tour guide in Salem for 10 years, and I've worked at hotels in Salem, and so I have a lot of experiences, and the fact that the Lizzie Borden was just too much, because I've been really obsessed with the Lizzie Borden case. And speaking of that, have you investigated the Lizzie Borden house in Fall River? And if so, did you experience anything there?
I did, and it was twice, and it was even before I realized I was related to her, and I felt connected to her both times that I was, investigating there. And the first time, it was a crazy active night. I mean, a woman and her teenage daughter, were sleeping in the murder room, and we just hear them screaming and flying down the stairs. The daughter was too scared to come back in. We had stuff moving, doors opening. The kids upstairs were going nuts. That was our first night, and I had no idea I was related to her, but it was a crazy, crazy active night the first time I walked in there.
Yeah, to give everybody an idea, so the Lizzie Borden bed and breakfast was under the same ownership for many years. The woman that I was friends with, Leanne Wilbur, actually recently passed, and her cat Max passed as well, and that was kind of heartbreaking for our community. It was purchased by another group, and so I haven't been back since the new owners took over. But I will say that I did film a show at the Lizzie Borden bed and breakfast in Fall River earlier this year, and it's going to air on the Travel Channel and Discovery Plus. either in September or October, depending on when they actually do the announcement. But I filmed a show with Dave Strader, Chris Fleming, and a woman named Luann Jolly. So hopefully, Laura, you'll be able to watch that.
I can't wait to watch it.
So Laura Brand, so tell me about sort of your experience in hotels, and sort of like, have you had any haunted experience at other hotels other than Lizzie Borden Bed and Breakfast?
Lizzie's was definitely my most active, and I think it was because of the relational ties we have. But just recently, I went out to work on the Bittaker and Norris case. And while I was out there, the serial killer, so I'll backtrack. Bittaker and Norris were known as the Toolbox Killers. They were active in 1979. And if you ever hear like the urban legend of don't go near a van, don't go near like the side of a van, it comes from Bittaker and Norris, the Toolbox Killers. So they would actually take girls straight off the street or hitchhiking into their van, which they called Murder Mac, and they would drive them up to the mountains and they would torture them with tools for hours and rape them, sometimes even for days, until they killed them. Now, they both were career criminals, but Bittaker actually lived in motels and hotels during his, career, ever since he was 18 to 38, which is when he was arrested for the murder. So 20-year time span in and out of jail, and he's living at these hotels, and one of them is very famous. Everybody knows the Cecil Hotel. That was one he stayed at quite frequently. And then there was one down the street, the Alexandria, which is about 2 blocks from the Cecil. And he lived there actually in 79, right before he moved into the Scott Motel. Now, the Scott Motel is in Burbank, and this is where he was for the majority of this killing spree with Norris. But right before that, he was at the Alexandria, and the years before, he was hopping back right on Skid Row, probably that 2-block radius. He was hopping between those hotels, which is pretty common in downtown Los Angeles. A lot of these guys would go from hotel to hotel, at Skid Row, and there's a lot of prostitution down there, a lot of drugs down there. So it's a prime hunting ground for a serial killer to be down that way.
All right. So with that said, I as someone that picks up on spirits, I definitely feel like that you are being stalked by Lawrence, by Mr. Bittaker. And we did a seance at the Hawthorne Hotel at our Salem event. Did you feel like that he was coming into the room while we were doing our seance?
I do. Like, I'll feel him a lot. But he came in very strong during the seance. And I feel like when he knows I'm near other sensitives is when he like really gets active. Like he tries to like communicate, especially when he knows I'm around, like, really sensitive and mediums like yourself. He'll come up a lot.
Well, just not to scare you, Laura, but when we were doing the seance, there was a gentleman who was circling around our seance table and kind of like look at me. He was wanting to get my attention, and I kept ignoring him. And we also had one of the victims come through, and I strongly feel like that it was Cindy, Lucinda. Yeah. So tell me about Cindy.
So Lucinda Schaefer, she was staying with her grandparents in Redondo Beach. And she was actually working part-time in a doctor's office. She spoke fluent Spanish. She was going to go to school for languages. And she was actually at a church function around 7:30 at night. And she left early because she was a little bit homesick for her mother. Her mother had just left 6 days ago to do a mission trip in Mexico. Her boyfriend was back in Wisconsin. So she left a little bit early and she was walking home. I actually just went to California and did her route that she went home. And it's heartbreaking. She was literally about 2 blocks away from her grandparents' place. And when they actually pulled up, Bittaker and Norris, and they said, "Do you need a ride home?" And she said, "No." And they said, "Would you like to smoke some grass?" And she said, "No." So they actually pulled up ahead of her. Norris got out and pretended like he was fixing something on the side of the car. And what's so heartbreaking is when I interviewed Bittaker, I interviewed both of them for 5 years before they passed away. But Bittaker had told me that when Cindy came up, was walking up the street, and she saw them, stopped, and him pretending to fix the van, Bittaker told me she actually hesitated, and she almost walked across the street. And so she wouldn't pass alongside the van. But Bittaker noticed it. And that's what I always say is these guys are hunters, and they notice stuff like that. They notice every single hesitation. They notice everything a person does. And they noticed Cindy make that one slight hesitation. And he actually turned around and said to Norris, he said, can you fix it? Is it getting fixed or something? Whatever he said was about getting fixed, and it gave her enough, safety to actually walk alongside. And when she did, that's when Norris turned around, picked her up, put his hand over her mouth, and swung her into the van. And they took off to the San Gabriel Mountains, where they raped and killed her.
So another layer to our story, Laura, is that Cindy also may be a Putnam.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So we're talking about one of our distant relatives here. And when she came into the room, I will say that when we connected to her, and my ears are ringing really intensely right now, she said, "Pray for me." So we actually asked Ryan Buell, who you may know from Paranormal State, to pray for Cindy. And I felt like she was at peace for the moment, but she kept telling me over and over again that she wants us, or wants people, to find her remains. And tell our viewers or listeners about sort of the search for Cindy's remains and Andrea Hall's remains as well.
So Cindy, the first victim, and Andrea Hall, the second victim, their remains have never been found to this day. And the reason for that is, it's going to come out. Norris gave the wrong location for Cindy on purpose. Some stuff is going to come out on the show about why he did this. And during the trials, Bittaker tried to say he had nothing to do with the murder, so he didn't give up any of the locations. So it's been years and years, and the FBI has gone up against Bittaker. He's been known by the FBI. John Douglas, the profiler, has said he's the worst serial killer he's ever come across, ever interviewed. But it took me so I worked with Bittaker 5 years, but it took me 3 years to finally break him down. And I finally actually got Bittaker to reveal where Cindy and Andrea are, the actual real locations. And that's why I just went out to California to do a spot check. And I can't say what was found, but stuff was found that does show that these are the right locations. So we're now in the beginning stages of, getting the funding. We're getting another show in the works. We are going to get a real search, like a real, fly out the experts, the dogs, everything. We plan to do a real search for these girls and try to really find them. After all these years, they've been sitting up the mountains and nobody has really looked for them because, Bittaker wouldn't even give the locations of where they were.
So Laura, I'm seeing cadaver dogs. Are you going to get cadaver dogs? Okay, yeah. Good. I think that you need that.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so to tie it into the show Haunted Hotels with Sam Baltrusis, did he happen to bring any of the victims to a hotel before murdering them?
So I believe from what he's told me, this is going to come out too. I'll just give a little taste right now. The unknown victims, he was targeting prostitutes and runaways before he kind of moved on to these wholesome girl next doors type of girls with Norris. But yeah, with those type of girls, there was they were brought to different locations of the hotels.
Now, I do know, picking up and connecting with the women, the victims, there was rape, but there may have been post-mortem rape as well, like necrophilia type rape. But so tell me, could there be like a psychic imprint at some of these hotels that the women were brought to, without giving, I guess, too much away?
I definitely think so. I think when something like that happens, my best friend was murdered. And I can tell you that all I wanted to do was go to her location. And I did. I actually begged the new owners to let me in because I just wanted to be in the room and I could feel it. So I think there's definitely a psychic imprint, especially with something as traumatic as homicide. I think it's even more than residual energy. I think it's imprinted on these locations.
So to give you an idea, so I actually, before I started writing books on the paranormal, I was on assignment in Provincetown, of all places, and I was staying at a hotel that turned out to be a transient hotel for a bed and breakfast for Tony Chop Chop Costa, who murdered multiple women back in the 1969, and brought them to Truro and then buried them in a shallow grave. And supposedly took out their hearts, cut out their hearts. Wow. Horrific murders. But I was in the room that he was staying at, and the hotel is no longer open, but it was basically a bed and breakfast, like a transient hotel, was in the room that he was in. I heard a woman screaming in the closet, and I opened up the closet door, and there was nobody there. I digging deep into the backstory, that was his room when he lived there, Tony Costa, and also there were rope like fibers found in that closet as well. So there was actually some forensics that tied to the murders. So they may have been kept in that closet. Wow. And I would actually, because of your background in forensics and sort of like that sort of thing, in my background as a clairvoyant, I would love to work with you on a case to hopefully solve these murders and find some justice for these women.
Yeah, I think it's great. I think it would be a great crossover, having the forensics and the mediumship. Like, you really do need both elements sometimes to really close these cases. I mean, to really get the job done.
Now, the reason why we have to be kind of a little bit tight-lipped about the case is because Laura is part of a documentary that is airing on Oxygen, coming out September 26th. So tell us about that show.
So this show is kind of like, it's a 2-hour documentary, and it's pretty much the whole background of Bittaker and Norris, how they met, how this plan arose, and their victims. And then it goes into my investigation and my work with both of these men. So I worked with Bittaker and Norris for 5 years, and a lot of my interviews with Bittaker were recorded. So you're actually going to get to hear Bittaker from beyond the grave and our, in-depth conversations. And they're jarring. They're very, very jarring. I don't want to give too much away, but they're explosive, truly. And then he sent me the police discovery. He gave me everything in the case. So the police discovery has not been opened in 41 years, except for the police, aside from me. So when I opened up these files, I got all the witnesses' names. There's about over 250 witnesses, and I've tracked down about half the witnesses of those, just on my own, tracking down everybody, going back to re-interview. And I found a lot of unknown information about these men, things that were going on back in 79. So I just started digging, and it was a rabbit hole. I mean, I uncovered so much more about this case. So that's what the show's going to focus on. Like, we thought this case was closed in 79, but there's a lot more victims. There's a lot more going on that people were not privy to. And it's really going into my investigation along with, the interviews too.
So how did you get involved with all this, Laura? I mean, I know a lot of your experience with Bittaker, and that's been sort of like something you've been really focused on, the Toolbox murders. But tell us about sort of like becoming someone that's into forensics and someone who profiles serial killers.
So, I started as a little girl, reading Nancy Drew. And my dad can remember, like, as early as like 5th grade, like editing my papers about like serial killers. Like, it started as just like a child, it's truly just like a mission for me. I think it's just something I was born with, I was meant to do. I'm sure you feel the same way with what you do too. It's just something ingrained in you, just a mission. So that's how it kind of really started. Then I went to school for it. And then after school, I decided I wanted to, do a serial killer study, kind of like Mindhunter. I wanted to do a collective serial killing study. So I started it. And it's actually going to be coming out late in this year. I think it's April. We're doing a homicide conference in April. So we're going to be debuting it there, which is really cool. But that's when I started the serial killing collective study. I came across Bittaker and Norris. Now, I hadn't planned on honing in on them at all. It was Bittaker was so challenging, and it took me 3 years to really, really get him to open up. But once he did, he was like a dam. And that's when he sent me the police discovery. He told me about once he gave me the maps of where Cindy and Andrea were, I mean, it was kind of game over, like I was like, okay, I have to find these girls and I have to look into this case. So it sent me down a whole nother path of exploring into the Toolbox killing case.
So it kind of reminds me of the Silence of the Lambs. Like, it's sort of like the Clarice Starling and Hannibal Lecter. So you were dealing with a monster. So you actually went to did you go to San Quintin to talk to Bittaker?
Yeah, it was at San Quintin's death row is where I do like most of my work out of.
All right, so tell people about, because not only do you have Bittaker, but that's also where wasn't Ramirez the Night Stalker there as well?
Ramirez was there as well. pretty much everyone you've heard of from California has been on San Quintin's death row. The one I always get asked, Scott Peterson, is on San Quintin's death row. Ramirez. I've interviewed Wayne Adams Ford out of there. He's the one who turned himself in, but he with a severed human breast in his pocket. I've interviewed Douglas Clark, who's a Sunset Slayer out of Los Angeles. He's there too. He was actually Bittaker's best friend. William Bonin, he's the freeway killer. I mean, pretty much every serial killer, you know, from the 70s. David Carpenter I've interviewed over there. Chester Turner. I mean, all these serial killers are on San Quintin's death row.
All right, so walking into death row, Laura, and having sort of like the Putnam, Lizzie Borden, you know, that I know that you have, did you pick up on any hauntings or anything that would be considered like energy at San Quintin?
Oh yeah, I mean, San Quintin is just like, even when you go across the bridge to San Quintin, you have first you pass by Alcatraz, which I don't know if you've explored that one yet.
No, but I want to.
Yeah. So, I mean, your first thing you're seeing is Alcatraz, and you're just like, oh my God, it's just kind of like jarring just to see that. And then you come up and you see San Quentin, a massive structure right on the cliffs. You're just like, oh my God. I mean, you have a visceral effect right when you're crossing the bridge, just when you see it. Then when you get up in the parking lot, I can't even describe the energy. It's very heavy. And then when you're walking on, you check in, you walk up the side, I actually have to pass by the gas chamber before I even go on to death row. So here I am, like, passing by a gas chamber. I mean, how many people pass by a gas chamber, you know, even before they go into death row? So it's like you're really, really just stunted right when you get there. You're just like, whoa, you're reminded of where you are, like, every second. And then, you know, the steel doors are opening and you're going in and you're hearing all the sounds of the prison sounds and the steel and the cuffs and everything. You're feeling all their energy too, you know, of, you know, being on death row. So it's very overwhelming, especially for somebody sensitive when you're up there.
So speaking of Ramirez and the Night Stalker, he was at the Hotel Cecil in its supposed location, but he also I heard that he actually haunts San Quintin as well.
Yeah, I've heard that too. I've heard that there's a lot of activity when they believe it's him at San Quintin.
Now, for people that don't know the whole backstory to the Night Stalker, who was Edward Ramirez, and you know, why would he be lingering in the afterlife?
Oh, who was he?
Yeah.
So Ramirez is another one of the serial killers. He was covered by the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department, just like Bittaker was, but he was a couple of years after, early 80s, and he was actually, what was wild about him is he didn't really have a victimology type. I mean, he was killing children, elderly, and all in between. And he was going into people's houses and actually doing it, which is really terrifying. And he didn't even have a real location. I mean, he was all over the map of Los Angeles, and like I said, all over the victimology map. So, I mean, it was a terrifying time, you know, while he was active. And he was actually going to the Hotel Cecil with the bloody clothes, and he would just take his clothes off and, you know, put them in the dumpster behind the thing and walk up, and nobody ever cared or noticed. You know, that's kind of like how seedy the Cecil was during this time. And he was known to go to the Mexican bars and restaurants. And, you know, he wasn't even really hiding while he was in Los Angeles. I mean, he was pretty much open. But he was, you know, scared. He scared like the entire Los Angeles County for years.
All right, so just to kind of reiterate what you said earlier in our interview, you also found out that Bittaker also stayed at the Hotel Cecil and the is it Alexandria or Alexander?
Alexandria, yeah.
Yeah. And then, so what is it about that location that brings in all these serial killers?
Well, it's Skid Row. The area is like Skid Row. So you have a lot of transients, you have a lot of runaways, you have a ton of prostitution, So, you know, the prostitution, the drugs, the runaways is what's drawing these serial killers to these locations and those hotels. The hotels are cheap, at least when they were there, you know, they're pretty low rates. So, you know, this is why you have like guys like Bittaker, guys like Ramirez, and a ton of other ones that are in this downtown area, you know, for the drugs, the prostitution, the runaways. It's a prime hunting ground. It's a prime victim ground for them. You know, and, you know, if they're coming back with bloody clothes or they're doing something, they're not really noticed. You know, it's kind of common down in that area. They're kind of blending in when they're down there too.
All right. So Also with Bittaker, was it difficult to find that he actually stayed at the Hotel Cecil, or was this something that just kind of came up in your research?
Oh, it just came up. I mean, he lived those blocks down there with all the hotels. He stayed at the Cecil. He stayed at the one of the ones right across the street from the Cecil. At the Alexandria, he stayed at in 79. This is during like the killing spree before he moved over to the Scott Motel. But it's pretty common for these guys to actually kind of hop around these hotels. They're kind of like the motels down there, and it's actually really common for them to just kind of hop around these different little like transient hotels, city hotels downtown.
All right, so getting back to the Scott Hotel and I saw your photos. You recently visited Redondo Beach in that area, Laura, to do additional research, and it sounds like that they don't have vacancies, or like is it sort of like difficult to book a room at that hotel?
Well, what's weird about this Scott Motel is when I tried to get a room and there's no phone number, so you can't call to book a place. There's no website, so you can't book a place online. And when I went down and tried to book a room in person, he said no vacancy. He's like, we're all booked up this week and next week. And I said, when's your next available? I want to book. He was like, no, all booked up. So I'm not sure where these people are booking since there's no phone number, there's no website. There's a mystery there already going on.
Well, it sounds kind of sketchy, Laura. I mean, I'm not gonna. Yeah, it just sounds something I would not want you to stay there. Even for research, even if I was with you, I would still not want to stay there.
Yeah, well, I stayed at the motel 2 doors down, and it was so weird because I went into the courtyard. I was kind of doing like night checks. And when I went there for the first time, I see a van in Bittaker's parking spot. And that kind of like threw me. I'm like, whoa, there's a van like in his parking spot. And then 2 guys were like working on a car, which is even weirder. 2 guys, you know? And I walked up and I said, I was just talking. And the guy goes, I'm Larry. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. So now there's a Larry with a van living at the Scott Motel present day in 2021.
That's insane.
Right? I was like, oh my God.
So, Laura, I just want to point out something. We actually have this new promotion called the 13 Weeks of Halloween on the My Paranormal Network, and I'm hoping that we could somehow like arrange sort of like a promotion for the Toolbox Murders. That's coming. If we had something like do a giveaway to promote the show, what would you want to like possibly give away?
Well, I have Bittaker and Norris's fingerprint cards, which is kind of cool. I have some notes that they wrote in prison. They're called kites. So when you pass a note in prison, it's called a kite. I have some kites that were seized by correctional officers that Bittaker gave out. I have a ton of stuff from the case. I have some of Bittaker's drawings and stuff like that. So I think those would be like a cool giveaway. A lot of them are sealed police files. So, they're not pretty much open to the public, but I do have them and I do have copies of them. And I think that would be a really cool giveaway is stuff like that.
All right, so we're gonna run a clip about the promotion, the 13 Weeks of Halloween. We're talking to Laura Brand. She is coming up on the episode called The Toolbox Murders, coming up on Oxygen on September 26th. Let's check out the clip.
Are you aware that you're known as like one of the most sadistic serial killers?
I've never had any sadistic behavior.
I interviewed Lawrence Bittaker for over 5 years. He once said to me, do you understand what it feels like to actually put an ice pick through someone's ear and not feel anything?
What have I done?
This is somebody I've talked to every single day. We had a friendship.
He tried to convince Laura he had empathy because he liked to have her visit.
He was actually proud of being psychopathic.
Bittaker was the most evil man because of that toolbox.
I always wondered what it took to get to that level of sadism.
The tape was one of the worst things I've ever heard in my entire career.
I had to hit her to get her to scream because she didn't want to.
And welcome back to Haunted Hotels with Sam Baltrusis. I'm talking to the one, the only, my cousin, Laura Brand, on the show.
How are you?
Hey, so we're talking about Bittaker and sort of like also the fact that he is one of several sailors that hung out at the Transient hotels in California. And Laura, someone who I'm a clairvoyant, but I also have worked in hotels for years and love staying in haunted hotels. Some of these hotels actually kind of scare me. But I heard that there's at the Hotel Alexandria there's a ghost wing that I would love to. What's the whole story with that hotel specifically?
I don't know. I haven't dug into Alexandria as much as I should have, but there is a ghost wing that has been sealed off since the 1940s. Nobody has been able to get into it. A lot of people have been trying to excavate to get to it. But it still has not been done yet. But yeah, it's something that's really, really fascinating to me. That actually something I want to really go explore is the Alexandria. Has always been. I've known about it even before Bittaker, the creepy nature and history of it. So it's always fascinated me. And then when I found out Bittaker was at these motels downtown, I was like, oh, now I got to go explore.
Yeah, it's kind of also too like for example, like the Black Dahlia. Like there was a rumor that she was at the Hotel Cecil, but we're pretty confident that's not true, even though it's been kind of perpetuated by a lot of people. But there's also the woman that was found in the top area. I forget her name. It's kind of escaping my mind. But you know that whole case with the woman that was found dead at that hotel?
Yeah. She was found murdered, but they never found her murderer.
So she was found there, and there was a lot of like video that really was shocking of seeing her push the elevator buttons. There was a whole special done on the Travel Channel Plus with Ghost Adventures, and one of my fellow radio show podcast host Patty Negri was actually on that case, and it's one of those things that kind of knowing that story and seeing all the documentaries and stuff of that young woman. Do you think that she was murdered, Laura?
100% I do. Because I looked at her autopsy reports. There was no water in her lungs. There was an anal prolapse, which could happen with decomposition, but it could also be from sodomy. There was unknown capsules found in the stomach that didn't account for her bipolar medication. So I think, and then the rape kit wasn't tested. So when they're saying these stories of there was no rape, it wasn't tested. She wasn't drugged. Well, those capsules and tablets that were found in her stomach were never tested either. And there was no water in the lungs. There was materials on the clothing at the bottom of the tank. These were also men's clothing at the bottom of the tank. So everything I have seen is an indication of foul play and murder. I didn't like the Netflix documentary that, perpetuated a story of it was, she was bipolar and just hopped in a tank. That doesn't account for, the autopsy that I saw of her.
Now, how did you have access to that, Laura?
Most autopsies are public information.
Okay.
Yeah.
But even like all like those tidbits of information, like male clothing also in the tank, and like that stuff is, to me, like shocking.
It is. It's very shocking. And I'm a crazy researcher. Like once I get my, hooks into a case, I don't stop. And when I watched the Elisa Lam, there was so much left out about, her cell phone was never recovered. There were posts still going up way after her death. Everything just didn't make sense to me, and I didn't like how the show just kind of like blamed it on being bipolar. So I did a deep dive into her autopsy report, some other things that didn't make sense, some things that were not addressed on the show. But the autopsy was pretty much what did it for me. There were so many signs of foul play from what I saw.
Now, Laura, so someone that specializes on serial killers and knowing the Lisa Lam story at the Hotel Cecil, do you think that perhaps maybe she was a victim of a serial killer?
It's very possible because of that area. The Cecil, that downtown, it's prime for serial killers. I'm not saying it is or isn't, but that is a prime area for serial killers to be hunting. I do know there was some hotel staff that was punching in doors to get into to rape some of the prostitutes and drug addicts that lived there. There were some accounts I've read about that was happening at the hotel. There was a lot going on at this hotel, a lot of seediness. crime, a ton of crime, so it could have been related to that, somebody at the hotel. It's always possible with a serial killer in those types of areas because they're so dangerous and prime hunting grounds for them.
So to fill people in with Lawrence Bittaker, he actually, you guys got really close. Well, close is not the right word. You guys he relied heavily on you and relaying his information before he passed. Tell us about the last few, I guess, months or last years leading up to his death during COVID, actually.
Yeah, it was right before COVID. And, it was September 2019. I get the call. He's like, I have cancer and it's spreading everywhere. He has emphysema. He had everything. So he goes, I'm changing the will to you're going to be the next of kin. So this will get rid of all the red tape for the case. If you need to go to the police department, get anything, the red tape should be gone for you. So we did that in September 2019. And then November 2019, I flew out for 3 weeks. And each time you go, it's 5 hours in a cage. So I spent, every day I could get into San Quintin for 5 hours with him. And you can see it actually if you go on my Facebook or my Instagram. My profile picture is me and him sitting in the cage going over the maps of where Cindy and Andrea are. And he looks so pale and he's a skeleton at this point. But he was coming down in a wheelchair every day. And we were just sitting in there for 5 hours straight, trying to work everything we could with the maps of where the buried evidence was, where the girls were. And then at the same time, I'm also trying to probe his mind to find out how did we escalate to this level of sadism, during this time. And I was getting frustrated because I didn't feel like I had the answers. I was getting the answers. So, the interviews got really tense at some points. But I mean, we just worked as much as we could up until the very, very end, right before he passed.
And we were doing the seance at the Hawthorne Hotel, and I got strongly that Mr. Bittaker had written something for you before. Do we remember, or do we want to even talk about what we picked up from?
Well, you can. What's so weird is because you had no idea about this. I mean, nobody had any idea about this. The thing I said to Bittaker, right? It was our last in face to face. I said, listen, if there's anything you haven't told me, anything at all, you write it down, you make sure it gets to me. Now, I do think he did write something down, but it never got to me. But I've never told anybody about that. And what's weird is you said, you're like, he wrote something down for you. And I was just like, oh my God. Because that was the last thing I had said to him.
I think, and also too, like connecting with his spirit, he also is kind of playing like cat and mouse with you in the afterlife. So almost like maybe like you're going to find it, Laura, but I'm not sure when you're going to find it. Yeah. And it could be something as simple as like, I love you, like something like that. And I think that's what we picked up, or something like I've heard like that. Like that's creepy, Laura.
Yeah, it's really creepy.
I'm just like, oh my God, like
with this case.
All right, so with that said, I mean, so do you ever get scared? I mean, I know that I've toughened up over the years because I've experienced, I've had an attachment, I've had all sorts of things. Do you ever get scared with these men?
No, maybe I almost feel like I have an extra layer of protection, like, because this really is, that's the only way to describe it, is I have an extra fearlessness, an extra layer of protection. Like I always feel like that's around me. So I don't get scared, but I've had scary moments when I went out to California and I went up to the mountains where Cindy and Andrea were. He actually gave me a third location. I can't say too much about it. A third location of, there's a cabin somewhere deeper there. And he wanted me to go check this out. Now it's very, very, very deep, 2 hours deep. So I was alone, which was stupid, but I had talked to somebody from Los Angeles Sheriff's Department and the forensic genealogist team. I had told them my location, where I was going, because I lose all service to go into the mountains. And I'm
getting chills, Laura. Like we're supposed to go out there.
Oh yeah.
The cabin.
So I get there. I finally get so deep. I lose my GPS. I lose everything. And I finally make it to this location, he said. But a woman comes up to the car and she goes, I go, can I go in? And she was like, you're going to need an escort. She's like, fires are rolling in. The fires are coming in. And I was like, I'm from Massachusetts. I've never been in the mountains before. I have no idea where I am. I have no idea how to get back. And I was just starting to panic. And she's like, I'm getting out of here. And she's like a state worker in the mountains. She's like, I'm leaving. And then it just so happened a guy was driving his truck, and I was like freaking out. And he saw me freaking. He's like, follow me. And he just guns his truck, and I gunned my car. And I mean, we must have been going 80 over cliffs of these mountains. And I mean, it was like an action movie. Seriously, like an action movie. So like I said, there's scary moments. There were scary moments when I was going to the motel, the Scott Motel, you know, at 2:00 in the morning. And I didn't know, like, you don't know what's inside of there. There's something sketchy going on. So I definitely have scary moments, some really scary moments working the cases.
All right, so just to reiterate the show, so it's going to be on Oxygen. Is there going to be other things as well, like maybe like an online documents to kind of like show people the whole backstory to this case?
There is. There's actually right now, if you go on Oxygen, they have a digital evidence of the case, and they have a ton of pictures, a ton of like interviews and stuff. Yeah, go on Oxygen and just type in Toolbox Killers. There's a ton of articles up right now.
And I have to say, like, you know, since Laura and Brandon and I come from the same lineage, Laura, I can tell you this is going to be so explosive. I can feel it.
Yeah, I hope so.
and you know, having, you know, I know that you haven't done a lot of television, but having done television and working on other projects as well. So how was it weird being on camera and being on a TV show?
It's, you know, it's still so new to me. You know, going in for filming and sitting there, and we taped for like 13 hours straight. And it was you're sitting there and you're talking to the producer and you're taping, and it's the first time I'm getting the first time, because it's, you know, it's all my real life. You know, I'm you know, really investigating the cases. I'm really talking to these serial killers, but you know, you have to get really close to the serial killers to gain their trust and everything. And you know, the whole world is about to hear these interviews for the first time, so it's almost like an intimate experience that the entire world is about to have of me. I'm sharing with the world this very, very intimate thing, you know, these interviews, and then my investigation. I'm really putting myself out there on display, so that's kind of, you know, scary at points when I really think about it, like, whoa, all my work and everything is going to be out there for people to critique or, you know, tear me apart if they wanted to. So, you know, I think for anybody in the public eye, you know, that's kind of a scary thing to go through. So I'm still kind of going through it. So I'll let you know after September 26th.
Well, you and I are kind of going through this together, because my show the Curse of Lizzie Borden is coming out around the same time, and TV a lot, but this is sort of like my big breakthrough role on the Travel Channel and Discovery Plus. So you and I are kind of going through the public eye thing together. As
yeah. It's kind of cool that I have somebody to go through it with too.
Yeah. And also too, like, so you're going to do a launch party. So I'm going to hopefully be able to go out to California in September, some of these hotels that we're talking about.
Yes, that would be awesome. We should really do this right after the premiere.
And also too, Laura, so on the show, Haunted Hotels with Sam Baltrusis, I asked my guests if they had a bucket list hotel to stay at anywhere in the country, where would you stay and why?
Ooh, this is a great question. All right, so I have my number one. I haven't done it yet, surprisingly. Is you're gonna kill me because I'm gonna forget the name. The Shining Hotel in Colorado.
Oh, the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, Colorado, which is one of my favorite.
Yeah, I'm dying to go there.
And so, what is it about that hotel? Is it because it inspired Stephen King to write The Shining? That one, the location?
You know, it's Stephen King too. I'm such a huge Stephen King fan. I'm writing the book on the Bittaker Norris case. All last summer I was up in Bangor. You know, I just love Stephen King. But no, I watched everything that comes out on the hotel I watch. You know, the fact that Jim Carrey was there and had to check out after a couple hours. Just the whole history. Like, it just sounds so creepy. I just kind of want to go in those haunted rooms and see if I can make it the whole night. I would say that's my number one, but there's a lot of them on my list too. I would definitely say the Alexandria and the Cecil and the Roosevelt in Los Angeles. There's a lot in Los Angeles I want to actually hit up.
Well, so the Hotel Roosevelt, and I have talked about this a little bit with Patty Negri, who was on my show, but Hotel Roosevelt actually is where our relative Marilyn Monroe has been spotted, her spirit.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so
I was actually thinking about booking a room there on the 27th, which 27th is ironically Bittaker's birthday too.
So maybe you and I will, and we also, when we do events, like we ended up at the same hotel. Well, maybe because I told you, but we kind of end up at the same hotels too.
I think we should do one night at the Roosevelt. We should go
I think
live.
So too. And maybe, because I know that the Marilyn Monroe suite is, I think it's kind of pricey, but that's where she supposedly is. And I'll tell you, I have connected to her as a clairvoyant. So I think she's got something to tell us, both of us.
Oh, I think so. I didn't even know there was a suite for her, but yeah, I think we should do one night there.
Okay, that sounds good. And just so you know, Laura, so Marilyn, she actually, when she reaches out to me, she actually reaches out to me as Norma Jean, which was her original name. And I didn't, I don't really know her whole backstory, but I feel like that there's a whole murder mystery cover up in her death, that it wasn't a suicide, that she was murdered. And that she had, so I would love to look into her case using experience as someone like a serial killer / like forensics expert into this case with sort of fresh eyes.
Yeah, that would actually be awesome. I've never looked into it, so I would be fresh eyes, and especially with the forensic expertise, I would love to look into it.
And kind of, since we connected, we talked about our lineage and all the people that we're tied to. Were there any that surprised you? Because Marilyn Monroe really surprised the heck out of me. But there's others that both historical and also recent, like Eileen Wuornos, who was a serial killer.
Yeah, Marilyn really surprised me. I didn't know we had any ties to her at all. And the Putnams was hard for me. It was a really hard pill, I'm sure, for you to swallow with knowing Salem.
It was for me too.
It was, yeah. Anybody who knows Salem knows why that would be a hard pill. It was, the Putnams really kind of started the witch trials, and they brought a lot of people to their death. They imprisoned a lot of people. So, finding out about that, and especially loving Salem like we do, it was a hard pill to swallow, I would definitely say.
I will tell you, like, my mother knew that too. She was like, Sam, I got to tell you. And that a lot of people, I've actually had arguments because people have read The Crucible and they go, oh, Abigail Williams and Betty Paris, who were the two first afflicted girls at the Reverend Samuel Paris household, are the bad girls. I'm like, you don't know my cousin, Ann Putnam Jr. He was their neighbor. He actually was part of that initial affliction when they all met with Tituba, and it was like a Venus. So basically, they put an egg. They broke the egg. The egg white goes into a glass, so it was like a Venus jar, and that supposedly read their fortune. So like what their husband was going to look like, that sort of thing. So that was actually the beginning of the supposed enchantment. And Ann Putnam Jr. would have dreams to come up with really crazy ideas, like the torture of Giles Corey, who was pressed to death over a 2, maybe 3-day period. That's from our cousin, Laura.
Oh, God. I didn't even know that fact.
Yeah. So she had a dream. She told her dad, Thomas, and he told the magistrates, who actually came up with that idea to press Giles Corey to death.
Wow.
Unbelievable. So before I let you go, so anything else, any other haunted hotel experience that you want to share with our listeners on haunted hotels with Sam Baltrusis?
Well, let's see. I did. Lizzie was definitely the most haunted hotel I've done, and we're gonna definitely be having some more when we go to LA next month. Maybe we'll have a part 2 for the next haunted hotel experience for us. Yeah.
And also too, when we were in Salem, Laura, did you have any, other than we had a seance and that was pretty intense, did you have any other experiences while you were in Salem?
I really felt a lot at the Hawthorne Hotel. I think everybody does. It's one of the most haunted hotels, in Salem. But you walk through those doors and you can feel the old energy of that hotel. The Hawthorne is like that historic, iconic place of Salem.
And I definitely felt a lot of energy, especially when we were doing the seance. But even before we were doing the seance, there were spirits like circling around us. And I gave a lecture there for my Wicked Salem book, and I remember seeing what looked like a kind of like a shadow person walk behind the screen. Oh, and Laura, like when we were doing, there was a period I kept seeing people walk in the door. Tell us about I see somebody behind the door, and you wouldn't check it out.
There's a couple videos, and my friends text me. They're like, "What are you doing?" Because I'm like running through these doors and looking around all the corners, and my friends are like, "What are you doing?" And and I told my friends, I'm like, "It's because Sam was like, I'm seeing people behind these doors." So I got up and my investigator mode went on, and I'm like looking through the doors, but there was no hotel workers downstairs. There was nobody downstairs. I did a thorough check of every room, every crevice. But yeah, you kept saying, I'm seeing those people. I'm seeing you kept saying they were hotel workers. That's what we originally thought. They were, hotel workers' quarters, like downstairs. It was like a laundry room and a break room. But I have the footage of going down through those doors, and you can see there's absolutely nobody down there. No workers, nothing. There was a wedding upstairs, so all the workers were actually upstairs working the wedding during this time.
Well, I will tell you, so Laura, like from my perspective, the library at the Hawthorne Hotel when we were both there with Ryan Buell was like a ghost hotel. Like they were like walking back and forth like it was like nothing. And what's even weird, like you can look through the door, there was no passageway. So they were like walking walls too.
Yeah. It was wild. And I remember the guy who was circling the table like nonstop. When we were doing the seance, just circling the table. And Shannon had the XLS camera. Her husband had the XLS camera going. And he was saying, he's like, I'm seeing something behind you, Laura, and it's hopping to Sam, and that was captured with the SLS camera.
Yeah. So our friend Shannon and her husband, so she was at the table with us, and there was apparently like this black mass that jumped from Laura to me, and it kept jumping back and forth on top of us. Doesn't it creep out?
It's probably one of our relatives.
it's probably Aunt Putnam Jr. like jumping on our shoulders. Well, cousin Laura, it was awesome talking to you and catching up with you. I can't wait to see your show, The Toolbox Murders, on Oxygen, coming up in September.
Mm-hmm.
And Laura, so for people to be able to find out more information about you, do you have a website?
Yes, you can go to www.sirenofsanquintin.com. And if you want to learn more about the case, just go on oxygen.com, type in Toolbox Killers. There's a couple articles up there. And the show is The Toolbox Killer, airing on Oxygen September 26th.
Awesome. So we're talking to Laura Brand, my distant cousin and good friend. Thank you for being on Haunted Hotels with Sam Baltrusis. Thank you.
My Paranormal Network.